We're going to call this session to order, and I'd like to begin by welcoming Julia Bicknell, Director of World Watch Monitor, joining us and being here from London, coming to testify before us. I just want to point out for the committee members that we are going to, you see in the committee business schedule, we are going to take 10 minutes at the end to do some in-camera work. So we'll adjust the schedule of questions accordingly. That being said, again, thank you for joining us, and if we can have you begin with your 10-minute statement.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you particularly for having me here all the way from the old country. As a former BBC journalist, I thought that I would just structure what I say for the next 10 minutes around the 5 questions that are key to any journalist, and that is who, what, where, why, when. And so I'll introduce myself. As you heard, my name is Julia Bicknell. I was a journalist in the BBC World Service from 1980. And what I was doing in the World Service, which hopefully many of you might have heard at some point in your travels, I was involved in the main newsroom, in the World Service newsroom in English. So we were gathering in news from all around the world. We were writing it. We were verifying the sources in order to produce those news bulletins. And I also spent some time producing NewsHour, the main news and current affairs program, where we analysed the news. And then in 1991, 2 weeks before the Kuwait War broke out, I was just about to arrive in Pakistan on a 3-month travel scholarship. And I was due to backpack across the whole of Pakistan. And I fell in love with the country. And I asked the BBC if I could go back to be based there. And so I arrived again in '92, and during my year there, I basically covered the floods, the riots, the plane crashes, the government changes, and so on. But I also covered the situation of minority faiths in Pakistan. That included the Ahmadiyya, who I met very early in my trip, the Ismailis, and also Christians. And particularly, there was an issue that was affecting minority faiths at that time, and it was about the decision that the Pakistan government wanted to introduce compulsory registration ID cards which stated your religion. And so I covered that for BBC World Service. And as part of that reporting, I went to visit a minority Christian community just outside Islamabad, the capital where I was living. And these people were living, I'm not kidding, amongst gravestones. They were living in a cemetery. That was their community. My friend Ikra will know the word Kachiabadi. It means slum in Urdu. Their Kachiabadi was in a cemetery. And their view of the Western world came in through their satellite television, because however poor they are, they have a satellite TV. And what were they watching in '92? They were watching Dallas and Dynasty. And that was their view of the world coming into their slum. And that really affected me. Fast forward to summer '94. This was a year in the World Service when I spent the whole summer reading the BBC World Service news, 17 hours Greenwich Mean Time, the news read by Julia Bicknell. And that summer was the summer of Rwanda. And you can imagine, I was reading over and over again about the atrocities being carried out in that country. And as you know, your own Romeo Dallaire, during that summer, was pleading to the United Nations to intervene in that situation. After those experiences, I moved to a part of the BBC called the World Service Trust. That's what I call the international development arm of the BBC. And it's what I call bringing international development through developing the media in developing countries. And we were often went out from the BBC, were invited by the country governments to transform their media, to make them more able to hold their own governments to account, to ask their politicians difficult questions about issues like corruption and governance. And as part of that, I went and lived in Vietnam. That's one of the reasons I'm wearing this jacket today. When I was living in Vietnam, I trained local journalists on the national radio and TV station to produce, in fact, it was not TV, it was the radio station. They were producing for the first time ever national radio phone-ins, because they didn't know what a phone-in was. When I arrived thinking I was going to teach them how to produce a phone-in, I realized they had no concept of people phoning in, like you have here in Canada. A friend of mine produces cross-country checkup. You have a way of having an open national debate across the entire country. A country like Vietnam, there is no way that they were doing that back in 1998. So I really understood what was happening, again, in Vietnam, what was happening to minority faiths, particularly among the ethnic Hmong. They were being discriminated if they didn't hold to the beliefs of the Communist Party, the Communist government of the time. I then moved to Africa, and I commuted to Sudan, both north and south. I spent time at the edge of Darfur at the height of the Darfur crisis, and I arrived in Juba 3 weeks after the peace agreement was signed. And so all of this background means that I, along with visiting places like Kenya, Somalia, and I managed to work. I was managing programs funded by UNICEF and UNDP. Now, John Kerry said last week in the States, how can we lead a world if we don't understand it? And we can't understand it if we fail to comprehend and honor the central role that religion plays for billions of people. And I felt that the story I had seen happening to people of minority faiths around the world was underreported. There were major violent events that happened in India and Pakistan that, because I was working in Africa, I never even heard about. And as I was sitting in the heart of the BBC, I thought, if I'm not aware of them, that means 99% of the world are not aware of them either, because I'm an international news junkie. So that brings me to the what and the when. So in the summer of 2012, I left the BBC and I started what I call a niche news agency, a niche online news agency that reports what's happening to Christians under pressure for their faith around the world. Now, you might immediately say, why do you focus on Christians? Well, our website states, we uphold everybody's right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, but we exist to tell with accuracy and authority the part that involves the global church under pressure for its faith, whether that's Catholic, Protestant, or Orthodox. And now to the question where. Well, I should add that our focus is the developing world, not the Western world. I have far more stories than I can possibly cope with coming from Asia and Africa. I'm not at the moment reporting on what's happening in Canada or the United States or indeed Western Europe. We aim to surface the stories that no one else in the mass media knows and hears about. We aim to be the most trusted, reliable, and authoritative source of information about the global church. So how do we get our sources and our information? Well, over the past 4 years, I've built a network of stringers, that's reporters, professional reporters around the world in these places, such as North Nigeria, India, and Pakistan. And it's not only my reporters who report back to me, but I've also developed trusted networks of religious leaders, NGOs, and community-based groups in such countries. And because they're on the ground and they're part of the local community, they can get there quickly. And I'll give you one quick example. In December 2014, a young Christian couple who were bonded laborers in Pakistan, which actually is technically illegal, were attacked by a violent mob of over 600 people who'd been indicted to violence by loudspeaker mosque announcements that the woman had committed blasphemy. Well, my reporter phoned me and, in fact, left a message for me saying that that had happened about 7 a.m. And by a couple of hours later, he was already in the village. He interviewed the relatives of the victims. He wrote his story later. He drove back to his home. He wrote a story that night. I got up early the next morning. I edited it, and we got it out to the world. And that was a horrific story that shocked Pakistan. But we had a man on the ground telling us that story. But he had eyewitness accounts. So our website, it's subscription-based. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. You can just log on to the website. You can subscribe for any country or all countries. And so I just want to mention one last issue, talking about the Chibok girls, who many of you have heard about. What impact do we have from World Watch Monitor? Well, our report of the Chibok girls is not an isolated incident. It hit the international headlines, but in fact, that was part of a pattern that's been going on since 1999 of Boko Haram atrocities against women and children. And we were able to, with the backing of some research done by an organisation called Open Doors. Paul Johnson is the chief executive here in Canada, and he's been hosting my visit. Open Doors had done a lot of research with, again, researchers on the ground, and they had concluded this pattern of violence against women and girls in northern Nigeria. And we didn't particularly push this report, but it went out. People from legal centres in New York picked it up, Amnesty picked it up, Human Rights Watch picked it up, and our report went as part of evidence to build the case against Boko Haram of committing atrocities against women and girls to the International Criminal Court in The Hague. So I didn't quite see how long I've got, but I think my 10 minutes is up. So that was a quick briefing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. You're you were right on 10 minutes. That's very impressive. Clearly, that's your BBC I was going to say your BBC background. So we're going to begin with the first round of questions, and MP Anderson, take it away.
We're just go ahead if you need to get ready. Very excited that you're here with us today. We had a conversation the other day, and someone mentioned to me, they said it's important on these issues that we know how to separate the signal from the noise.
Noise,
yes.
Yeah.
And so in Iraq, for example, everyone was killed or getting killed or whatever all groups were. But when you're going to pick and choose an event to advocate for...
I'm struggling to hear you, David. Oh, have I got to put this in? Right, okay, English. Sorry. Oh, English. I'm hearing. Channel 1 is English. Sorry, I was thinking I was hearing you naturally. Okay.
I could speak louder.
Yeah, I've got it. It's better. Yeah, sorry.
Right?
I was thinking if you were speaking in English, I would be able to hear you, but yeah.
Good. Just talking about how do you separate the signal from the noise in the events that you choose to cover, and then we can come back with another question on that.
Yeah. As I say often, I spend as much time standing down stories as I stand up stories, and that means, working out what are the stories that are exaggerated, what are the stories that people are promoting because, dare I say, they want to get donor dollars. It's a question of, I always check the sources back to the origination. I don't just read something on the internet and say, okay, that must be true. So, of course, with my BBC training, I know a lot about what are the trusted news agencies around the world, what are the ones that are, for instance, on Syria, the Syrian Observatory of Human Rights based in London has proved itself to be pretty reliable. There are ones that you can trust. There are ones that you have to be a bit cautious of. And of course, again, you can triangulate. So you get something from one news agency, and then you can say, is that what I'm hearing from people on the ground? Is that confirming? Often, as we all know, governments take a long time to, for instance, confirm the number of people who've been killed in an atrocity. Often it's NGOs working locally based in the community that have a much clearer idea. So it's that kind of thing. Just my whole background and training is how I separate the signal from the noise, yeah.
So you've talked about your expertise in dealing particularly with the issues of Christians who are under pressure, but I guess my question is, Canada and the West been responsive enough to the plight of Christians in developing countries who are under pressure, or have we gotten complacent here and basically failed to pay attention to those issues?
I think particularly people have an idea of what Christianity is. They think it's somehow a Western, dare I say, often North American religion, and I think we forget to our peril that Christianity was birthed in the Middle East. It's actually not a religion of white people. It's actually a religion that came out of the Middle East. And so I think, I remember people have said to me, they're shocked when they hear that Christians speak Arabic. They don't realize that there are millions of Christians who speak Arabic. So there's an awful lot of education that needs to happen in our countries. I think, dare I say, I think we have to educate the church as much as we have to educate anybody. But I think there is a real sense of, dare I say, religious illiteracy, particularly amongst the media, and I can hold my hand up as having been one of them. But I think what happens is often people, if they don't have a particular faith that is very much part of their own life or very important to them, they can't actually put themselves in the mindset of someone for whom that is absolutely part of life. Just as I quoted from John Kerry, he says we've got to recognise, if we want to understand the world, that 85-90% of the world's population religion is a key integral part of their life. And so I think we've got to get out of our Western mindset and actually start being more aware of how the rest of the world lives.
Are you familiar with the work of the Office of Religious Freedom?
I've met Andrew Bennett. I've met him twice. I met him once at the Foreign Office in the UK and once again last year in Rome. Yeah.
Okay, so he was doing some important work internationally. I'm just wondering, the office has been shut down. I'm sure you're familiar with that. But how can the Government of Canada effectively support religious organizations working to promote religious freedom around the world?
I think that I was very impressed by Andrew Bennett when I met him in London and again in Rome. I walked in Rome with him and had quite a deep conversation with him about what's happening in Ukraine, and I was sad that his office has been closed, but of course, that's the government's decision. I think that we would want the Canadian government to ensure that the work that he started is able to continue, and I think that it's up to other parliamentarians and people of similar experience to keep tapping into that experience that he has started to bring and started to develop, and I would really recommend that.
Can you just give us your opinion on what ways that you would see that religious persecution is often connected to the repression of other human rights? Do you feel there's a connection between them?
Religious
persecution is related to the repression of other human rights?
Yeah. Well, for me, we talk a lot about human rights, and I would say the fundamental human right that we all have is freedom of thought, conscience, or religion. That is the number one. If you can't have that as a human being, then what about, in a sense, that's the one that everything else stems from. So, of course, if people of one religious persuasion decide that other people of their same population are not allowed to have that same freedom, then that's when you're getting religious conflict, and that's when you get religious persecution. So if we're standing for human rights, then we have to stand for that fundamental human right, freedom of religion. Now, in the UK, we're very clear. We say freedom of religion or belief, and that includes the right not to hold a religion and the freedom to have a belief. So when we have our all-party parliamentary group on freedom of religion or belief, we have a representative of the British Humanist Society who is involved there and very much part of that group. But he's alongside the Baha'i, the Ahmadiyya, the Sikhs, the Hindus as well. And so, yes, of course, there is a fundamental. You can't ignore people's right to choose their religion alongside defending other human rights.
We've been doing a study on the Rohingya Muslim population in Myanmar. I don't know if you're familiar with Myanmar at all, but if you are, can you give us some advice about what we might recommend in our study and our recommendations at the end of that study on how to deal with some of these issues of the way religious minorities are being treated in that country?
I visited Burma, as I call it, about 3 years ago. So I have been in Burma, and of course, I'm really delighted that Aung San Suu Kyi although she's not actually leading the country, she's very involved in leading the country. And I know there's been decisions and some disquiet that she hasn't spoken out as strongly as she might have done, or a lot of people would like her to have done, about the plight of the Rohingya. And I know there's also a discussion as to whether they should even use the term Rohingya. Now, my colleague and friend Benedict Rogers of Christian Solidarity Worldwide is a real expert on the Rohingya, particularly in Burma. But what I would say is, from my experience of Burma and looking at Burma, yes, they do have these. It does seem very strange that the government has introduced laws like a person of one religion is not allowed to marry a person of another religion. I mean, I just don't get that. I mean, it just seems so strange. And of course, they want to preserve the Burman identity of the majority population, but I don't see that is actually going to be the way to go about it. And I don't think many Canadian citizens would.
I'm just going to get you to wrap up that answer if you want another 10 seconds. And
say again?
Do you want another 10 seconds
to
just
fine.
Finish the thought?
I mean, I think I've made my main point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
And the second question is going to come from Ms. Khalid.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Becknell, for coming in today and giving us this presentation. It's definitely an honor to have you here and to listen to your perspective. I think it was a Weber that said that religion is the opium of the masses. And having been born in Pakistan myself, I've firsthand experienced the troubles that countries like Pakistan go through, where religion seems to dominate the discussion and seems to dominate the reason for conflict. I'm wondering, and you've had experience with many other different countries, is there a basic socio-economic reason that you may think really it defines religious conflict in those parts of the region? Do you think that there are other reasons other than religion, underlying core reasons that could initiate conflict in these areas?
Well, I think Pakistan is a particular case because obviously, back to 1947 and partition, it was decided, and again, I'm sorry, I'm a Brit. The British was the Brits were the colonial power. It was decided that they would carve out a separate country to accommodate the Muslim population, the vast millions of population that were part of colonial India. So in a sense, Pakistan was set up for the Muslims. However, Jinnah, its founder, was very clear. He said this is a country of all faiths, and he named the faiths, minority faiths, and he said, Pakistan is for all of them, and that was what his vision was. It was never to become a sort of a country in which someone who does not hold Islam as their faith should be a second-class citizen or discriminated against. So I think, as I see it, and you may know Pakistani history better than I do, but, people like General Zia bringing in the blasphemy law in 1987, where he sort of said, we are going down a path of Islamization. This is going to be enshrined in law. That law, and, many people around the world agree that it's dare I say, it's a law that has been abused to settle land scores, to settle disputes with neighbours, etc. Now, there's a whole lot of factors, as you and I know. One is, and again, my facts are a bit out of date, but when I was a correspondent there, Pakistan spent something like 65% of its GNP on its military. That meant it wasn't spending it on schools, hospitals, roads, infrastructure, whatever. It was spending it on its military. Why is it spending it on the military? Because it's afraid of war with India and other such things. So if you've got a population a country that's spending 65% of its GNP on its military, that means you have very, very high levels, similar levels of illiteracy amongst, the majority population, and therefore you have all those factors that go along with it, which is poverty, lack of money leads to lack of education. When you don't have money, you can't buy health. Therefore, you have all these problems. And so I think the combination of the sort of, the country created for the Muslims out of India, combined with a lot of other factors, then you throw in Afghanistan, you throw in, what was happening there, the rise of the Taliban. Let's not forget that I was there in the 90s, the Americans, the ISI in Pakistan, there was a lot that was behind the creation of what is now the Taliban, and we shouldn't be ignorant of that. So I think throw in Afghanistan, then throw in Al-Qaeda, then you've got a country that has a lot of problems with its religious minorities.
Thank you for that. And you had mentioned that the fundamental right that every person has is the right to religion and the right to belief. I will respectfully disagree. I think it's the right to life, liberty, and security of person, the fundamental right as to whether we can exist or not. And I don't think that should be based on what we believe in at all. As our colleague mentioned, we have been studying the Rohingya Muslims specifically, but the whole plight of that region in general. And my question to you is, are there any socio-economic concerns that, if alleviated, could help the plight of specifically those people in that region?
Yeah, I mean, I think I know that, again, I've got friends who work in Pakistan now who are working on the educational curriculum of Pakistan. And you might have seen there was a recent report, I think it was the US Commission on International Religious Freedom, or one of those bodies, just a few weeks ago that has done a report on the education system and the textbooks in Pakistan. And when you look at the textbooks and you see that right from the very beginning, children are taught, those people who are Ahmadiyya, those people who are of Christian background, I can't even remember the language, but, they are, described in language that I would hate to see in my educational textbooks. And I think if we could, I mean, there are some positive initiatives I've seen and reported about, actually, which bring majority faith, minority faith together in dialogue in places like Lahore, where they are getting together, they are getting to know the other, but they've got to overcome all of this, dare I say, kind of misinformation, miseducation about what these people are in their midst. I think the education system would be a really good place to start.
You have 45 seconds.
Well, you know what, then I'll just pass. My question's a bit longer than that, but that's fine.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
All right, and a guest on the committee today, Mr. MP Weir, you're up.
Okay, well, thanks very much for having me at this committee, and very much appreciate your testimony. Regina's St. James Anglican Church is in the middle of my riding, and it's been involved in sponsoring 2 families of Iraqi Christian refugees. I've attended some fundraisers in support of that project, so I have met Christians who speak Arabic, so I appreciated the point that you made. Now, I should perhaps clarify that the congregation was quite open to sponsoring refugees of any faith, but it got a Christian family initially, and then that family, I think, played a role in identifying another related family to bring over. So on this theme of the persecution of Christians, I did want to just touch on Open Doors World Watch List. The top violators of the religious freedom of Christians seem to be countries that have dictatorial governments and a history of conflict. So I wonder if you could maybe just speak a little bit about the relationship between conflict and religious persecution.
Gosh, that's a big question. I mean, if we focus on, when you say the relationship, can you be a bit more precise what's behind your question?
Well, I mean, I suppose we're trying to get at the root causes of religious persecution, why it happens and how it can be alleviated and prevented. So I wonder, you could, I suppose, speak to any factors that might help us with that evaluation. But, I just wonder if there are certain types of characteristics that would cause this problem in certain countries.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you look at many countries around the world, you'll see that there's a whole combination of factors. It's, I live in London. It's a totally, very multicultural city. We've just elected our first Muslim mayor. So I live side by side, and I don't have a problem with that. But in many of these countries, if you think about it, what's happening is the other person, they have more money, they have a bigger house, they have privilege, they have this, and this. And if I'm poor and and I don't have a job and I don't have any prospects of a job, if I feel that I am marginalized in my own society or whatever it might be, I am likely to take it out against the other. And if the other has, and if if as I go about that, I'm hearing that the other is, maybe not to be trusted, maybe always, corrupt, or whatever the, as I was talking about in the Pakistani educational system, if that is in me from a child, or if I'm in a society where it's very much, if the narrative I've grown up with is one of, these people are evil, or these people are this, that, and the other, then of course when I come to it with all of those factors, I am going to, then a man comes along and says, hey, I'm going to give you, some cases I've heard, $20, $50 to join Boko Haram or join Islamic State or whatever. I have to say that tends to appeal to a particular type of person, but those are the factors that feed into a community turning against another community. So yes, there are all the social, economic factors, and politicians can play a part as well. Politicians are very good at using religion to whip up a particular, position, or, if you support me, you will do this to those people or whatever. So, and, dare I say, I'm sorry to say, the church can and has in the past in my country, back in the 1600s, the other. We don't want the other. They're evil. They're wrong. We will get rid of them. We'll kill them. And so that's what's happening. It's a whole complex system of factors, I think.
Yeah, well, just in terms of the role of the church, Pope Francis has been fairly outspoken about the persecution of Christians around the world. And I wonder if you believe his efforts have been effective. Have they made a difference?
Well, I think I'm an admirer of the Pope Francis. I think what he's doing is really, he's living out his Christian faith, the very practical things he does, like, washing the feet of homeless people and those very tangible symbols that he enacts in his own life. And I think when he goes to a refugee camp, like he goes to the island of Lesbos in Greece, and he meets the refugees and he talks to them, and yes, he takes some of them back on his plane to Rome. I think he is showing what living out his Christian witness is all about. I think he's also drawing attention to the fact that many of these refugees are in fact Christians, not all of them, of course, by any means, but he's sort of allowing that discussion to get into the mainstream of society, to understand what are the factors that have driven those Christians, all these things I've talked about, discrimination in jobs, in education, in employment, if they've been in a country like Syria or Iraq quite often, and what has driven them to get on a boat and try and cross over from, say, Turkey to Greece. If you look at a country like Eritrea, there are certain churches that are registered, and anyone who is not a member of those 5 registered churches, not only do they risk military conscription, which affects everybody, but they are completely, without opportunity to practice their own faith in a country like Eritrea. So eventually they jump on boats or they cross Africa first, which is in itself a massive achievement, and try to come to the UK or to France.
Well, thank you. And in terms of the work that you've been doing, could you maybe speak to the main barriers to investigative journalism about human rights abuses, and are there things that Canada could be doing to try to promote and facilitate that work around the world?
Well, the main barriers are just protecting your sources and protecting the people who you want to tell the story of what's happened to them, because quite often they're terrified, and the last thing they want to do is you to spread that in the media. So you're always dealing with a very complex sort of discussion about, can we name you? As you know, one of the key things about verifying sources as a journalist, you always want to say, where did I get this information from? How do I know what I know? And if you're talking to someone who's in fear of their life, who's maybe deeply traumatized, but who's witnessed an atrocity, the last thing you want to do is to risk them being either immediately or later, victimized again by, maybe their family can be targeted. Even if, when we interview people who've even come as far as the UK, often they say, I'm happy to talk to you, but I do not want you to put my name out there because my family are back in the country and they may get killed. A country like Iran is a good case in point. You might have someone who's converted from Islam to Christianity, who's found their way to Europe, and they are being harassed, they're being maybe taunted, they're maybe being even attacked by other refugees in a refugee camp. And 2 of my reporters have been to one of the refugee camps, and they've met these people, and they're so afraid for their family back in their own country. So that's the key thing, is just building the relationship, having them trust you, being able to trust what they say to you, and also checking them out. I'll give you a very practical example. I was talking to my colleague, a woman called Lindsay Hilsum, who's the chief international correspondent of Channel 4. She went to the refugee camps,
Ms. Bicknell,
let me just finish this one. It's quite interesting. She said everybody, because the German government had said they would take Syrian refugees, everybody was claiming to be Syrian. So she was starting to say to them, which part of Syria are you from? You know, what's your name? Which part of Syria are you from? And she said it was amazing how many of them were not, in fact, from Syria. They're Afghans or they're, you know, other countries. But of course, she knows because she has that experience, the same as I do. If someone says to me, yeah.
Thank you. So because we've only got about 10 or 12 minutes left, if it's okay with the committee, I'm going to suggest we move to shorter questions for this period, and that way we can get through everybody with a 3-minute question. So starting with that, it would be Mr. Tabara.
I'll make my question very short. Thank you for being here. As you know, the Syrian conflict has been going on now for 5 years, and there's many individuals that have been displaced, millions, almost more than half the population. In the case of the Syrian Christians there, what's some their situation there, and can you give me an experience of how Syrians that are in the capital Damascus and Syrian Christians that are in Damascus and Syrian Christians that maybe are outside Damascus, where it's much more dangerous there, and what's their situation like? If you can elaborate.
Well, a lot of, you know, it's not surprising. It's a civil war, so I would say hundreds of thousands, if not, you know, a million. I don't know. I don't want to put a figure on it at all, but many Christians have fled Syria over the last 5 years, as have many other of the civilian population. But many of them are actually consciously wanting to stay. They're actually choosing. I know of people personally who have the opportunity to go to America. They have family in the United States, and they're choosing not to go. And the reason they're choosing not to go is because they don't want to leave the heartland of their faith and their home. It's their home. Their family, their tradition, their culture, their language is all rooted in that country. So I know personally of people who, despite, you know, bombs falling on top of their heads, despite their children not being able to go to school, they are staying there because they want to remain, and they think that they don't want to leave. They also know that, you know, leaving is not necessarily the answer to everything. When you have a refugee arriving in a country like UK or Canada or America, it's just the beginning of another set of complex questions. And many of them say, more than anything, I just want to go home, or I want to stay in my home. So I would think that depends where they're from in the country, as you will know, because your family roots are in the Middle East as well, Marwan. You know, different parts of the country are much more severely affected at different times than others. So at the moment, everybody in Aleppo, you know, there are many Christians who have chosen to stay in Aleppo. Now they are very anxious because literally, you know, the war has come to Aleppo. Damascus, controlled by Assad, by the government, it's not such a difficult situation. So I think it does depend which part they're from and as to how their mindset is situated right now.
Thank you very much. Next would be MP Sweet.
I wanted to posit a different notion than what was discussed earlier in regards to the inalienable right of religious freedom. You would have come in this building, and on that tower that you came in under, you would have passed 3 scriptures. One would say, "Give unto thy king thy righteousness, O Lord, unto thy king send thy judgments. Without a vision my people perish, and he shall have dominion from sea to sea." And I think we have been the beneficiaries certainly our jurisprudence here in Canada has been a beneficiary of our faith background. Those scriptures, by the way, share from the Torah as well as the Christian scriptures. And I firmly believe that when fighting for religious freedom, because if you have religious freedom, you have freedom of conscience, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and so many of what we call inalienable human rights fall out of that. And I'm just wondering how you feel in that regard, if I'm on the right track, if that's a motivation that you have.
It is. I mean, coming back, you know, of course, the life that, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as the Americans would put it. what's the pursuit of happiness? You know, how do you as an individual, your citizen, follow, you know, your dream of what it is to be happy? I would argue that it's to have freedom of conscience, to have freedom of belief or no belief. And so for me, you know, as someone who happens to have been very privileged to have been born into the UK, you know, when I've been in these countries and I've seen that, you know, just by accident of birth, if you like, other people happen to have been born in a country where those freedoms are not available to them, you know, part of what motivates me is to say, you know, if I believe that for every human being, you know, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness involves freedom to believe what they choose to believe, then I would want to fight for that right for them in as much as I would for my own fellows in the United Kingdom.
Quickly, you're kind of an expert on Pakistan. You knew Shahbaz Bhatti as I did, and a number of people around the table here who was brutally killed, the minister of minorities, religious minorities. Has anything changed in Pakistan in regards to the blasphemy laws? Are we seeing any hopeful signs going forward?
Well, the latest thing, as I understand it, is that the judiciary the Pakistani judiciary have realised that there are a lot of loopholes in the blasphemy laws, and I think particularly in the light of, you know, the latest atrocity in Lahore, where although you know, many Muslims were killed as well, you know, the Taliban, the branch of the Taliban who claimed that bomb, said it was specifically targeted at Christians on Easter Sunday. I think a lot of, you know, wonderful Pakistani people, the kind of people that I met and really loved being with, you know, they see that the blasphemy law is something that is abused, and the vast majority of Pakistani society, I think, you know, realise that this is an unjust law. Judiciary agrees it is. They are waiting for their parliament to amend. You know, they've basically sent that law back to the parliament and said, we want to bring changes. As far as I'm aware, from the beginning of this year, nothing much has happened on that, but it would be, you know, it would be good for other governments around the world to be able to ask Pakistan, you know, what are you doing back in your parliament with this law? If the judiciary has sent it back and said it needs improving, can we see some action in the Parliament?
Thank you. MP Mendocino.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Bicknell, thank you for being here and for bringing your worldly experience in journalism to this committee, the subcommittee. There's so much to cover, so little time to do it in, but I'm wondering if we can just explore two ideas. You've already heard some questions from my colleagues about the correlationship between religious persecution and the suppression of other fundamental rights like freedom of expression, but I wonder if you agree with the proposition that there is a correlationship between religious persecution and the repression of other fundamental rights, including discrimination based on certain inalienable characteristics like gender, disability, sexual orientation. Do you agree with that?
Do I agree with the proposition, say again,
that along with religious persecution also comes the repression of inalienable human rights, like the ones I've just outlined?
Well, it can. I mean, I'm not saying it always does, but the evidence shows that where there is religious persecution, there is also repression of, for instance, Boko Haram, repression of the rights of the women and children. You know, they are raped, they are, you know, tortured, they're traumatized, they're abused, they're taken away from their families. You've got to look at the evidence around the world. I mean, look at Islamic State. What has it done to the women and children, not only Christian, but Yazidi women? It's all evident, the evidence is there. So, you know, but you have to, again, talking in answer to your question about, you know, how do you get those facts out? How do you get those details out? Sometimes it's very, very difficult to gather that evidence.
And I take it that you agree as well that in the last 30 years that religious persecution has evolved in a very negative way in that we see more violence, more extremism. I mean, I think that's fairly self-evident. Indeed, I'm sure it's been covered in many of your stories. Is that a fair comment?
Well, again, you know, we're in a 24-hour digital media world now. So, we are aware of things that are happening on the other side of the world that maybe we weren't aware of. These kind of atrocities were happening in the past and we didn't necessarily know about them. But again, the evidence shows, and something as you mentioned, the World Watch list that's compiled by Open Doors International every year shows that the rate of religious persecution is rising, that more countries are under religious persecution than ever before. And that's not only their research, that's Pew research from the United States, that's other reputable research is proving that this is on the rise. And it's on the rise for a number of factors. But you've got to look at the evidence, and it's clear.
Just last few seconds for the simplest question of all. To what extent does your own personal faith inform your work?
Of course, it has an impact, but I also have a complete, what I call BBC DNA in me. And my BBC DNA tells me that, you have to look at the evidence and you have to tell as fairly, reliably and accurately what's going on. And if that involves, you criticising, church leaders or whatever, if they've been involved in abuse, then I will do that. I'm not going to just be a sort of an apologist for things that I believe to be wrong. So it's a hand in hand, really. I have a personal faith, but I would argue that enables me to be clear about how I understand other people's faith, including Muslims. I would say some of my closest friends in Pakistan when I lived there were Muslims and are Muslims, continue to be Muslims, and they continue to be my friends.
Thank you, Ms. Bignell. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you very much. I think that is it for questioning for this committee, and I once again just want to thank MP Sweet for recommending you to come in. I think it's been a very enlightening discussion, and one which I know is going to provide a good perspective for us to reflect on long after this meeting is over. So again, thank you for traveling from London. Thank you to your colleagues that are sitting with you, and that's great.
Thank you very much.
So
I'll just remind you, as Don, my host, is here, worldwatchmonitor.org if you want to look out for more. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the plug. And we're now going to suspend and go in camera, so we'll give the room a couple of minutes to clear.